I first saw Chrissie on YouTube, which is where I found her content. And then she started joining some other shows like Friday Night Tights and doing other things. But I think it was on Friday Night Tights. And it was just a joke where they were saying it was one of the I think it was a Miss Marvel writer, one of the Muslim ones. And
Yeah, I know
and
where
you
this is
said that
going.
sounds like something you yell on a plane before you try to like blow
So
it
they're
up.
talking about the name of this, this writer, and I don't really have a ton of like knowledge of. I mean, yeah, I've seen like all the recent like superhero movies, like Avengers. I'm up on all that stuff, but I don't have like the years of comic book knowledge that these guys have. And then they just mentioned this name, Basha K Ali, and I was like, that sounds like something you yell out before you blow up a plane, and it's just like the true thing. That's how it sounds, and, like, even if it bombs, like, if that bombed, at worst, you look a little racist, but at best, it cracks everybody up, so it's just being willing to, like, take a lot of little risks.
Now, is that part of like trying to deal with hecklers in an audience, like being able to immediately just let out a response like that?
In my experience, I don't really get very many hecklers. I've heard some horror stories like shoes been thrown at people, people getting on stage trying to fight them. That usually happens with male comics. There's a guy like jumps on stage, tries to fight them out of nowhere. But yeah, again, it's like sussing out, all right, who's drunk, who's mouthy, are they going to be a problem? And it's like, can you play with them? Can you have fun? Can you make fun of them? Can you make fun with them? So I think with any kind of like heckle or interruption, you should be able to deal with. That's the real test, I think, of a good comic is like how well can you improvise to each particular crowd.
It's been years since I did this in college, but I was part of like Georgia Tech's improv comedy club. When you mentioned
College improv.
yes,
Ah!
are there any things that you do specifically to like practice improvisation, or is it just after you do it for a while, it just comes to you? Like how does that work?
It's hard to know because I did it for 5 years before I ever did stand up. I interned at Late Night with Conan. That's when I realized I didn't want to be a news reporter. I wanted to be in comedy in some capacity. I wasn't sure how. The writers at Conan were saying, do improv, do improv. So I joined as soon as I graduated, did that 5 years. I feel like it gave me a lot of good, like what you would call, I guess, transferable skills. And I guess I am still keeping them up because I find a really good set is a perfect blend of material and improvisation because you want to personalize it for that group of people in front of you. Like, why are they leaving their houses? There's so much competition for entertainment now, just with streaming services alone. I mean, that's why like movies are sort of tanking right now. But the fact that a group of people have left their homes and are live in a room to see you, it's a huge compliment. And it's like you better make it worth their while. You better bring it 100%. Like, don't you dare perform drunk or too high or too whatever to remember your stuff. And you better personalize it for these people because you might be the only impression of stand up that these people have. And if they don't have a great time because of me, I'm going to feel responsible. They may not come back to this comedy club. They may not check out stand up again. They may not want to watch me again. So I just feel like each performance, you really have to give it your all. And for me, that's going to definitely include improv because that's how you make it special for people.
So that kind of reminds me, there's an old story. It was Walt Disney when he opened Disney World or Disneyland, the first one. And he was talking to the employees about why it was important to like keep it clean, to do everything perfect and not just slack off. And you even talking to the, like making sure there was never any trash on the ground anywhere. And when someone asked him about it, he's like, there's always going to be someone walking through the gates that day that this is their first time and possibly only time coming to this park. It's got to be perfect because this is possibly the only time we're going to give them this experience. And I think sometimes people, at least nowadays, don't think like that, right? Whether, you take for granted that someone's just, watching you as a comedian, right? It's refreshing to hear that that's kind of the attitude that you have. I've only gone to a few comedy shows. It's not something that I do often. I live in Northern Virginia and we go to DC is where the comedy clubs that usually get good comedians are. And so it's a to-do to kind of do that.
Well, I mean, we don't even really get them in DC anymore because most comedians steer clear of this area or they're of a certain political persuasion that isn't going to entertain me.
For some reason, I'm also thinking about Tim Pool and he talks about Jimmy Kimmel, and it was just like, for years, it was just the show of like, say, isn't the Orange Man bad? And this is supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
Well, they stopped taking risks and they stopped telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, A comedian is essentially the fool. We've discussed this before on the podcast, but the comedian is the fool, and the fool is the most important person in the king's court because he's the one who tells the king the truth. And if you do not respect that about the comedian, you have lost the truth because everybody else in the court is going to tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah. And because comedy is like, well, mainstream comedy is much like mainstream news, very leftist. A tactic of the left is kind of they want to kind of evaporate reality, right? They lie to us all the time. They gaslight us into thinking what we're seeing and experiencing every day isn't real and that we're wrong. And that if we question something that's going on, we're slapped with a racist or you're a white supremacist or you're an anti-vaxxer. So it's like, not only we can't ask questions, we can't be curious about the world around us. We have to accept the narrative that we're given. I think that's a really interesting opportunity that comedians have. It's like, it is a way you can kind of expose the truth, or at least attempt to find truth, is through humor, because it's not as direct and you can get people to think in a way that, if you do it right, like maybe you're not as, in some ways, you are not as easy to censor, because like I think Ryan Long has done this pretty beautifully. I don't know if he's been censored. He's not very outright about his beliefs. He does a good job at like making sketches that are a good commentary about society, but that gets you to think. Like his most viral one was like woke people and racists are the same.
Yep.
And I mean, I feel like just about everyone's seen that at this point. And it's like, oh, white people should have their own separate bathrooms. Yes, definitely. And you're like, that's what's great about comedy. It can make you think.